Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're so happy you're joining us today. We have an incredible guest. Hans Eric Hageman is a graduate of Princeton and Columbia University Law School. We have a little bit in common that we both were lawyers and then said, this isn't what God's calling us to be doing, and walked away from the full-time practice of law. But Hans had started and led organizations for underserved children in Harlem, New York, Kenya, and Lucknow, India. So, man, three continents he's been busy on. He's a recipient of the Robin Hood Foundation Heroes Award and the Essence Magazine Award. Hans is currently the executive director of the Tutwiler Community Education Center, a community and youth development organization located in the Mississippi Delta. Not only has he been doing all this stuff, he's also been involved in the lives of middle school and high school students and teaching them educational and the healing power of nature on service trips to places like Nicaragua and Senegal, where they've helped build a vegetable garden for AIDS patients. And here is Hans's down and dirty, absolute positive goal is to be an ancestor worth remembering. Hans, welcome to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're so glad to have you here, and we're going to have a great conversation today.
I'm excited to be here, Pat. And I should have updated you. I'm no longer with Tutwiler Community Education Center. I'm going to be starting a program to create anti-fragile men and boys, and I'm going to base that in New York, and then ideally move out to other states.
Oh, awesome! So you're not sweating in the humidity of the Mississippi Delta anymore?
Well, in a few months I would be, but I'm hopefully going to be out of it by then.
Okay.
And the tornadoes and everything else that goes with it. Yeah.
Oh man, I'll tell you, it's like coming from Colorado. I live at 7,000 feet, and when I go
Ooh.
to Florida and some other places in the Southeast to teach and train law enforcement, it's like trying to breathe underwater. I can't take that. I can't take that humidity and being at sea level. It kills me. But anyway, well, we got to talk about your journey because graduating from two prestigious um, Princeton and Columbia Law School, uh, and then to go, hey, I want to start dedicating my life to the underserved, not only in Harlem but on other continents, India, African continent, going to South America. What's the story that kind of Paul Harvey? What's the rest of the story behind the story that led you on this journey?
It was pretty early on. I mean, my parents kind of set the example, and even though we were lower middle class, they let me and my brother and sister know that we were incredibly privileged just because by being in New York and other things, we had access to certain educational advantages that people in the community where we grew up in didn't have. And my father was a Methodist minister. He came from a white working class, well, poor family actually in Nebraska. My mother was a black woman, a family of 12 who came up in the Great Migration from the South to Chicago, and they both met in Chicago. And he ended up starting something out of what was called the East Harlem Protestant Parish. And he kind of launched off of that into a place called Exodus House, which was a residential drug treatment center. And that became our home. So we had the apartment, on I guess it was the fourth floor walk up, and there were 2 floors of dormitories where the men and women came in during the day, but at night it was about 60 men, most of them out of prison, jail, or Vietnam veterans. And so from a very early age, I had my world framed by their stories, but then also by watching my parents and my father understand that grace needed to be extended to people who had fallen
Mhm.
incredibly hard, but who were going to be given a second chance. And so it was always, I mean, I'm still running into people whose father worked there as a therapist or whatever, and um, it was tough. And I think the work essentially took my parents' health, and they died at what I'm what I regard as relatively young ages. But that lesson of being of service and
Mhm.
understanding that you have a larger purpose on earth than to just satisfy your own selfish desires. And I got to tell you, I've run into a lot of people who do that latter part, and I knew that wasn't for me. And I was raised early on to know that no, you've got another path.
Yeah, that one of my favorite books is by Ryan Holiday. The Ego is the Enemy, and
Yes.
and in the professional arena, it seems to be my experience that people get into career paths for the wrong reasons, and you got this probably the same way I did when you tell somebody, well, yeah, I was a cop for 26 years. And you're a lawyer though too. So you became a lawyer after you were a police officer. I go, no, I did it the other way around. I was a DA, assistant DA, prosecutor for 4 years, and then became a cop. And then they raise their eyebrows and like, why? You know, because they have this, I don't know, misguided idea that people become lawyers and doctors and PhDs and stuff for the money, when in reality, that's the furthest from the truth, and we have to follow that vocation. Got what God has gifted us with. So for you, um, being in that environment as a child, a teen, growing up, being surrounded by folks who were part of the what I call the least, the last, and the lost of our communities. How did that shape your mindset, and how did you not burn out from being um, in that environment for so long?
That's an interesting question about the burnout, and I don't know. I think again, the lived example of my parents always pushing forward, and we'd be back, me and my brother, in our room in our bunk beds, and there'd be a knock at the door at 3 in the morning, and my father would go to the door, and he was being called to prevent a suicide or a fight, at 3 in the morning. There was nothing, excuse me, nothing that seemed to phase them. My father marched with Dr. King down south, was arrested, beaten down, jailed down there, and as young kids, we knew where he was going. During the Harlem riots of '64, he was called out with other clergy to keep peace in the streets. And we were sitting. Our mother made sure we stayed down on the floor in case gunshots rang out. And so
Mm,
from an early age, and they made it act. They acted as if this is just how life is supposed to be. There are going to be problems, and then there are those of us who are shepherds and called to do the work of calming that the flock or the waters. And then there are others who either cause problems or others who just sit on the sidelines. And we knew early on that we were not going to be sitting on the sidelines. Our parents didn't tell us specifically what we were supposed to do, but one thing that we did know was that we were supposed to perform well academically, and that we were not going to be sitting on the sidelines. And so that early on, I mean, my father never served in the military, but he understood when I went to Princeton and I joined ROTC, and when I went to Air Assault School in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and when I became a military police officer in the Army Reserve in Anniston, Alabama. I mean, he got it, and it was an interesting time then because it was just post Vietnam, and nobody at a place like Princeton, for the most part, was going into ROTC. You just didn't do that. But
yeah.
I did, and I have no regrets. It taught me a lot. It allowed me to see another part of America. But that was all part of how we were raised. We were raised to be curious. We were raised to be creative. We were raised to seek freedom, and we were raised that to believe that there was a higher purpose, and that ran throughout. I remember coming home from as a freshman in high school after a track meet, real hot during the summer, and I'm walking through the housing projects, and I saw this smoke, dirty black smoke coming up. And I'm thinking to myself, that's terrible. I hope nobody got hurt. I wonder what family's going to be displaced. And it turns out that it was my house that burnt down. Um, Lost everything. My parents didn't miss a beat. They scrambled around, found a rental, 2-bedroom rental, gave one bedroom to my sister, the other bedroom to me and my brother, and they slept in the living room on a couch. And this was over a year. And I think back on that, and it's like, yeah, of course, your house burns down, you just keep doing what you do. Um, and it's infused my belief that post-traumatic growth and anti-fragility, are incredibly important skills, both to take in ourselves, but also to teach the young people coming up behind us.
Wow. I, I did not know the story about your house burning down. That's incredible. And to have that mindset and attitude. And earlier you mentioned the word grace, and I don't remember what pastor it was that shared this, but at some point in time, it was explained to me that grace stands for God's rewards at Christ's expense, and
Hmm.
that really impacted because we so you hear the expression, oh yeah, but for the grace of God, I would, and then fill in the blank, and we just kind of say it flippantly. But if we really reflect on it, it is indeed that God is showering us with things we don't deserve, and it was all done at the expense of Christ. And like today's beginning of Lent,
Right.
and we're preparing for the Easter season and the Passion and crucifixion and resurrection, and it takes on a whole new meaning and perspective if you have that understanding that we don't deserve any of this, and to have the example that you had of your parents and giving you that foundation, I think is an incredible gift to share. One of the I want to get into something here. I just got a really weird question because I'm kind of like uh, the hunting dog that the squirrel runs by and I see and I'm like, oh man, you just said something that I got to ask only because he just passed this week. What did you ever get to meet Jesse Jackson? And was that part of your circle with your through your dad?
Well, a couple things. Going back even before Jesse Jackson, I have a letter from Dr. King to my father thanking him for coming down south to help out, and a picture of my father released with other clergy from, I guess it was a jail in Alabama, standing behind Dr. King. So I have that. I did meet Jesse Jackson. It was kind of brief and abrupt, and it was while I was working as chief counsel in a U.S. Senate subcommittee, and he was in my senator's office with his feet up on my boss's desk, and that kind of threw me off. But that was my personal experience with Jesse Jackson. But my father knew him.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was sad to hear of his passing this week,
Yeah,
and in the nature, all those years that everybody thought, and he thought he had, onset of Parkinson's, and it was actually something a misdiagnosis. I don't think it would change the outcome of
right,
treatment or anything
right,
like that. But yeah, what a great man, did a lot of things for um, all Americans. Um,
right.
so one of the things, I'm on an advisory council for a nonprofit out of the West Coast that is trying to equip our children with social emotional learning skills. That do you see, or what's your impression of what of the direction you're going? Because you've done some stuff that within the New York education statewide has been adopted. What do you see as the negative influences as to why our kids are socially and emotionally deficient in people skills, and what can we do about it?
Well, I definitely think there's a digital aspect to it, and kids are being trained and raised to be consumers of digital products, not not producers. So they're not playing in the digital economy. They're being sold to, and part of the selling and part of the way it's supposed to work, in my opinion, is that the more they rely on technology versus community and one another to find their freedom and their creativity, then the better off the people who are in that tech business are. Uh, and it crosses the socioeconomic lines: white, black, rich, poor,
Mhm.
and I just got finished working with a group of 6 Princeton undergrads. They're the brightest of the bright. I mean, I can't even the numbers are scary in terms of the number of applications to a place like Princeton versus the number of kids who get accepted. And these kids obviously were accepted. but they had significant fear of what artificial intelligence was going to mean for them, both professionally but also socially. And that was some of the work that we did in the month we had together. And I think now they're more at peace with it, because if a guy soon to be 68 could work in that world without being consumed by it, then certainly their 20-year-old former valedictorians could handle it as well. Uh, but then there are also kids, and I'm going to be doing a workshop next week at a maximum security prison for teenage boys who've been convicted in adult court of extremely violent crimes. And I've worked there before. Um, and I'm going to be starting a leadership workshop. And part of the message there is they need to first learn to lead themselves. And after that, they need to have tools to go back to the communities that they took so much from once they're released, and give back as leaders. And one of the interesting things, and I'm trying to figure out the message, because I don't want to say, oh, you're lucky you got locked up all these years. But one of the interesting things is going to be they have not had access to the digital resources the kids on the outside have, which I think research would show that their brains are wired differently and in a positive way in that regard. They
Mm.
have to rely on social relations. Now, how they deal with those social relations, that's a
Mhm.
different story. But things like nonviolent communication and so forth, crisis communications, they need to figure out how to bring those in. But there, in my opinion, my argument is that they are better placed than young people, again, across the socioeconomic spectrum, to be able to engage in more meaningful conversations, to relate on an emotional level, on a social level, more so than kids out here where technology is taking over classrooms and taking over social lives.
Yeah, that's yeah. Chris Voss. I don't know if you've ever. He was,
Oh yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Hostage. Yeah.
incredible international hostage negotiator for the FBI, and
Hmm.
his book. I just finished reading his book, "Never Split the Difference." And
Right.
one of the things I think that what this whole AI uh, and the isolation that our kids, and everybody blames it on COVID. COVID or not, the AI revolution was coming anyway. Uh,
Hmm.
but how we can, how as adults that we don't have the ability to address those four basic needs that Chris Voss talks about: safety, security, prosperity, and control. That what, and it can be the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy, and all that kind of stuff. But
Hmm.
fundamentally, those are what we want. We want to be safe and secure in our lives. We want prosperity in our lives, and we want particularly control in our lives, especially over our safety, security, and prosperity.
Right.
And and as adults, I think we intuitively grasp that, but we haven't figured out a way of how do we interact with our younger folks who crave and need and want the same things, but don't know how to communicate in an adult way, and express how they feel. I don't know. I worked gangs for a long time, and that was the number one thing I eventually realized is kids are joining gangs because that's where they're finding those four needs being met in an unhealthy way. And I know, so I want to get into this because you're dealing with the really high risk population of juveniles that are convicted in adult environment, in adult court. Instead of getting out of juvie when they're 21, they may be
Right.
lucky to get out of prison when they're in their 30s, or maybe never get out. How do you work with restoring hope in the lives of people whose lives are so regimented, being in prison, and um, they I don't know. I just how do you deal with that and encourage people that um, have lost hope?
Well, and hope is a big piece there. Some of it is helping them, giving them the vocabulary and a vision of what can be, even if they remain incarcerated for a lot longer than they would like. but especially if they get out. And so some of it I think Chris Voss would call it affect labeling, for instance. They don't have the emotional literally the emotional vocabulary to express their feelings. I mean, they're going to be, maybe three buckets in which they place their feelings. But if they're given a wider range to be able to express those feelings, that's going to transfer into how they feel about themselves, but also into their relationships with other people. I think there's more and more research coming on about somatic intelligence that Bessel van der Kolk, a PhD guy, talks about the body keeps the score. You hold the insults to your body and the trauma that you've developed in your body. And so how do you release those? Some of it's through movement, some of it's with being in touch with nature, some of it's through breath work. And all of those things are things that I've taught. And I was nervous about going into an environment like that prison and teaching these boys because their prefrontal cortexes aren't even developed. And, with
Right.
adults, it's still a challenge, but with teenagers who have committed serious, serious crimes. And I was told by the head administrator there, don't ask them what they've done because you're going to be like all the other people who will never want to come back. so, so he said it's not the typical violent robbery or murder. So like there is a typical one, right?
Right.
Um, and so giving them the vocabulary, giving them a sense of possibility, helping them to envision and letting them know that, you're not judging them, that none of us wants to be witnessed on our worst day. And most of us would not be able to withstand that scrutiny or the embarrassment if there was a camera put on us on our worst day. Um, Theirs was a bit more excessive, but then also, again, in terms of grace and in terms of second chances. I mean, that's part of how I was raised. That if they are prepared to accept responsibility for what they've done, then there will be a second chance, and that they may have taken a life, but they could also save 10 more lives if they go out into their communities. And I know you talk about these kind of archetypes, but in my model with this Carencia leadership, I have warrior, healer, and architect. And they need to figure out how to go out with and teaching them about those archetypes and letting them know that they could play a tremendous role, not only in their own reclamation, but in the reclamation of neighborhoods that have been subject to violence and poverty
Mm.
for decades. They could have an incredibly powerful impact, and particularly is going to be part of my message and is now in the space of AI. So AI can hold all this knowledge, but where's the wisdom? And that they need to bring, again, you talked about social emotional learning. They need to bring those skills and the wisdom to the situations that they're going to find, and they have the power to transform not only themselves but their families and the communities. And if I can get them to believe that, and that's my challenge, then that's where the hope becomes a flame that can get ignited.
Wow. Where's forgiveness play in all this, particularly, uh, excuse me, self forgiveness, or even asking for forgiveness from somebody that um, have hurt or wronged or negatively impacted? How's that play in your processing? And I want to talk about get into talking about the breath work. A lot of people misunderstand that, and I think it is an incredibly positive tool that we all can use in our daily lives. But first, can you touch on the topic of forgiveness, both internally and externally, in this process of healing and growing?
Well, you definitely hit on it when you talked about self-forgiveness and that internal process. They, again, in terms of vocabulary, these young men, in my experience, don't have a vocabulary for it. They don't even know that it's a thing that they are supposed to or have the ability to do. And so, I was teaching them things like mindfulness. I got some pushback when I tried to teach Christian meditation. It's New York State, and so there were some challenges there, but I'm still gonna try to bring that back. We'll see what happens. Uh, but showing them the power of forgiveness, and I've had to experience it myself in terms of people who have betrayed me. Um, and frankly, right, when we look at that, we've got to look in the mirror and figure out who we've betrayed ourselves. But letting them know that you're not standing there as some paragon of virtue, that you're fallen just as they are. And that, part of the path for me has been to figure out how to forgive myself, and just sharing my process for it may or may not be theirs. But if they're given the vocabulary, if they're given examples, if it's explained to them how that will then allow them to move forward, and without it they won't move forward, they get to make a choice. And you talk about Maslow's hierarchy, or personal agency. Just that fact that they have a choice in this process, for most of them, is going to be eye opening, and can be enough to get them to the next stage.
Wow. Uh, Man, so that's great because we all have that. It's I did an episode with a guy who had been a police chief, elected constable in a jurisdiction in Texas, who got betrayed and all sorts of stuff, including indicted federally, found not
Mm,
guilty. All sorts of stuff was going on in there, and we had this incredible conversation, and we ended up calling the episode "Let Judas Walk." And sometimes you have to let the people that have have done those things to you uh, do. Christ could have stopped Judas. I mean, in a
mhm,
heartbeat. I mean,
mhm.
in more ways than one, he could have stopped him. But
You're
he,
right.
that was the path that Judas chose, and Christ let Judas walk because Christ knew the end of the story, the resurrection. Um, but in our human nature, um, letting people walk that have harmed you is kind of like uh, not a choice that we want to make because we want revenge or whatever. And sometimes you have to let your past walk, what you were. I think of Saul, the Apostle Paul, and
Mhm.
I mean
Yeah.
he was, he didn't actually kill anybody himself, but he sure didn't stop people from killing other Christians and inciting them. And he had to let that part of him, Saul, walk and be,
Mhm,
transformed into Paul.
mhm.
And in a dramatic way. I personally don't want to get blinded and knocked on my butt by Jesus to get my attention. Um,
Right.
but the breathing. One of the things that we've taught cops, a team of us here in Colorado, is interacting with folks with developmental or intellectual disabilities. And that
Mhm,
box breathing, that 4 count breathing thing is something that we train cops is if you do that with someone who is escalated because
mhm.
of an intellectual or developmental disability, and they see you're calm and they will mimic that, and because that's how their brain is wired. But not but in in your experience, the breath work that you're talking about, um, what are some examples of the kind of impact that has on kids who or young people who are easily agitated or get escalated or get so overburdened with the stress and pressure of guilt and all these other things? How's that work for them, and how can we use that in our daily lives? And we're not locked up physically in a prison, but we may be locked up in our own prison. How's the breathing thing work?
Well, it also touches on what you were talking about when you're teaching, the police officers, because there's the science around mirror neurons. If you have a calm demeanor, then the person that you're interacting with is going to assume that,
Mhm.
based on science, right? It's mirror neuron research. So there's that, and I also taught breath work to, and I have a mentor, and God rest his soul, Adam Walensky. He was a former speechwriter for Bobby Kennedy, who created something called the National Police Corps. And he brought me into St. Louis, brought me into Baltimore, Mississippi, to, among other things, teach breath work, because he knew that if the police officers had their own resourceful state, and they were able to access the parasympathetic nervous system, that the people they were dealing with would pick up on that, and it wouldn't be the same cop citizen interaction that you sometimes see in certain neighborhoods. And so it goes back to that. But I've worked with kids. I remember this one group, and again, they weren't supposed to tell me what they did. And this young man, 16 years old, was talking about the arson that he committed, where some people were killed, and the police cars that he damaged, the officers that he assaulted, and we were talking about that. This was as a kind of prelude to some breath work that we were doing, and I had a small group, um, but all these boys at one point or another would start tearing up, and you can't do that in an institution like that. But
Mhm.
it was just us, and it was the group that had committed to the breath work, and then they would talk about how they couldn't sleep at night because their lower back was hurting, or they had headaches, and the doctors couldn't tell what was going on. But throughout the weeks of the breath work, they realized that those physical symptoms, again, Bessel van der Kolk's "The Body Keeps the Score," and what's known as vagal tone. Uh, there were physiological changes that they were experiencing, and it also affected them cognitively, because as their bodies were able to release that tension and hurt and trauma, their minds were all of a sudden starting to tell a different story, both non-consciously but also in the conscious realm. And that was the challenge, because as they saw that process unfolding, they were concerned that other people who weren't taking the breath work might pick up on it and see it as a weakness. But
Mhm.
I was telling them, no, if you're able to control your nervous system, you're going to be the more powerful one in the situation, and avoid a lot more trouble from the administration, in addition to from your peers. And in fact, New York State, and again, New York's got a lot of issues, but I think it was the first state to certify my I didn't just teach breath work, I taught breathwork coaching certification. So I wanted to certify these boys as breathwork coaches, because that was then a backdoor way for them to get the process and their own practice in. But then also they would have a certification or a reason when they got back out into the communities to convene circles of other young people and say, hey, and the kids on the outside know what these kids were in for. Hey, I'm changed. This is one of the practices that changed me. Let's figure out how to put this together. And I'm going to be starting that back up now that I'm heading back north, because I've seen the power of breath work. And one of my teachers was somebody named Dr. Belisa Vranich, and she's done a lot of work with the military and law enforcement around the issues of breath. Has a lot of research to back it up, and so I've seen it on both sides, both for law enforcement and the mirror neuron piece, and along with the kids who in this that kind of an environment didn't know how to find peace, but all of a sudden realized at night they could find some.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And and I want to be real clear. It's not a cure all. You take breath work. Yeah, you complement that with. I know you said Christian prayer. The first thing I thought of years ago, I was taught. I was actually headed. I thought I was going to be a priest, and was living
Hmm.
in a house of studies on camp, well, just off campus at the University of Dayton, and I thought I was headed to the Marianist um, priesthood. And one of the things I learned in that environment was contemplative prayer,
Hmm. Hmm.
and from when I heard you say Christian prayer, that's the first thing I think of is that where you intentionally get into a space, literally a quiet space, and reflect, and it's contemplative prayer conversation with God. And we had other things. I say the rosary um, every day, and just
Hmm.
different other tools that keep me focused on that purpose in life. And repetition's the mother of learning. That the
Yes.
more you repeat
Yeah.
something, I mean, that's how we learned our ABCs. That stupid song, but it taught you something, and then that became your habit. Not just
Hmm.
not just a. You can't blame your personality kind of deal of, well, I just
Right.
fly off the handle because no, you can intentionally work on those. And there are some scientific reasons for some personality disorders, but the general idea, road rage. You can control whether you're going to lay on your horn and MF
Right.
somebody who can't hear you, or you flip them the bird or whatever, and you screw around with them, speeding up and tailgating. All those kinds of things are completely within your control if you intentionally recognize what you're doing and have that self assessment.
That's right.
So, what are some uh, I don't know, tools, action steps you could share with our listening audience of what that looks like to develop that I think you call it body wisdom in some of your stuff is what literally physically can people do starting like right now to start making those awareness changes and that what you call body wisdom.
Some of it is first being clear about your values. If you were asked to ask people, "What are your top 3 values?" They're not gonna be able to give you an answer. And, if you don't have a destination, then any road's gonna get you there. But, so first getting people clear about their values, and that's what I did with these boys, and that's what I've done with my former students. And also helping them develop rituals and practice. And so you talk about the rosary or contemplative prayer and so forth. For some of these kids that I work with, it's about first thing in the morning before you pick up your phone or rush to do something else digitally, just ground yourself. Feel where you are, figure out a breeze or not coming across, figure out where there's any aches or pains or tightness in your body. Notice where that is. Notice any stories you're telling yourself. Then there are a number of tools, whether it's bilateral tapping, where it's something as simple as alternating tapping on the shoulder while you think about your problem. Um, Emotional freedom technique, which I've used with veterans, and as a recognized treatment in the VA hospital, where you tap on certain acupressure points on the body, and while you're saying certain statements to yourself. So there are two things working there, both cognitively and then somatically with the
Mhm.
body. Um, it's understanding that without energy and that can come through breath, it comes through exercise, it comes through proper nutrition, that if you're not in a resourced state energetically, then cognitively your brain is going to take you other places. It's figuring out if someone is working on a level of identity or beliefs. What is it that this person believes and how did they get to that belief system? Where did that come from? And working with that, or the identity. If they're able to say, I'm the kind of person who, after I make a mistake, will correct that mistake and learn from it. Or I'm
Mhm.
the kind of person who knows there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. But too many people have different identities, have different belief systems. So you need to figure out where people are operating on the level of identity, belief, energy, values, and then bring in the different tools, whether it's emotional freedom technique, otherwise known as tapping, or mindfulness training, or breath work, or eating properly. Because again, nutritionally, if people are eating ultra processed diets, that's also going to affect them chemically and energetically. So there are a range of different things depending on the person in front of you.
Yeah. And to kind of take it out of because a lot of people uh, don't grasp of the process, if you will. I'm trying to think of how to say this. Like you said, getting grounded when you wake up in the morning, and this is literally my first thought when you said that is, oh yeah, because I have plantar fasciitis and that comes and goes in both feet. I literally plant my feet on the floor,
Hmm.
and and I'll do those you know uh, calf raises and stretching and whatnot to get out of bed because literally if I don't. those first 30 or 40 steps I'm going to take are really going to hurt. So
Right, right.
there's truth in what you're saying is that that start your day off intentionally assessing where you're at. And for me, it is literally uh, putting my feet on the floor and go, okay, if it doesn't hurt, then I got a good day coming. If it does, now I got to do these stretches, or I have a tennis ball I roll my feet on, kind of
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
things, because that is that helps me start my day off in a better mood. Because if my feet hurt, then my mind hurts because now I'm pissed, you know,
Yep.
kind of deal.
Yep.
And that whole intentional living and what that looks like. Uh, and I love how you phrase, what do you value? And most people don't understand or can't articulate, or they have the pat. Well, faith, family, friends. They'll rattle off something because they think that's what you want to hear.
Right.
And the one thing I have learned that really gets somebody focused on their values in that very self-assessment awareness arena, mindfulness, if you want to call it that, is I ask them, write down the one sentence you want people to say about you at your funeral. What do you want them to say? And I don't care what it is, just write it down. Oh, I want them to say that
Mhm.
I'm a great guy. And then after you write it down, then I'm going to ask you, well, what are you doing to not live that sentence? If you say, well, I want people to say I was a great husband and father, and it's a cop. And I go, and I said, "Well, what are you doing to not live that?" Well, I try to spend quality time with my family, and this, that, and the other thing. And then I'll go, then how come you're signing up for all the overtime that comes down the pike? So to challenge them, to get them to start doing that
Right.
self assessment, because once
Right.
you internalize um, things, you have a better chance. It's Sun Tzu in the Art of War that once you internalize the value of something, then you have a greater chance of success at achieving what you're going after, as opposed to external uh, rules and regulations. Do it because I said so. I'm not going to change your behavior. I'm not going to beat you into submission, and be successful at bringing about the positive work culture or family culture. So all this kind of rests on knowing what your purpose in life is. So what's your advice? How does a young person, because this is what we do as parents, we do it as uncles and aunts and friends and whatnot. We say to a 7-year-old, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And they think in terms of jobs. Well, I want to be a policeman, and
Right.
I want to be a
Right.
doctor. W- How do we discover our purpose in life, regardless of what age we're at?
First, and again, it sounds simple in general, but knowing yourself is the first step, because then that's going to lead you to where you are. It's why I reevaluated my practice of law. Was I actually living out my values? And so, if you teach young people that, number one, you have to develop what your values are. Number two, you have to figure out how you live them, and what the evidence of that is for yourself, and be able to answer every day, have I lived in accordance with my values? And then also teach them that, you know what, I know it's nice to have a whole bunch of friends, but if you can focus on a circle of friends who share your values or who
Mhm.
support you as you live out your values, that's going to be important too. And it's going to be even tougher now. I just finally get my first iOS app up. It's free, called Inner Forge. And so it helps people calibrate their nervous system. And then I have another one, and I have a girlfriend now who is very big in the business world, and she says, "You can't do this," but it's I have a so that's the iOS app. I then also have a web app that's $49 lifetime. And she says, you should be selling this for at least $500. But I'm not going to do that because I want to reach, and it's not AI. It's based on the training and coaching and teaching that I've received, that I've found useful.
Mhm.
And then it works with that. And it's like an online coach for people. And I'm going to be using it with farmers. I'm going to be using it with who have a much higher depression and suicide rate than people realize. I'm going to be using it with veterans. I'm going to be using it with grad students who report 6 times the rate of I think mental illness than students undergrad. I mean, 6 times. I mean, that's insane to me. And so, and they, particularly men, they're not going to go out and boys, they're not going to go out and seek support. And so then how do you reach them? So, I have these apps, and the goal eventually will be to create an online community so that you're both online, but then you also have in-person events. I can't remember the it's a Christian fitness organization where they have fellowship and fitness every day. It's wish I could remember it. But that's something I want to institute wherever I end up landing next. And so being able to create these IRL, as the kids call it, in real life experiences, along with the tools that look like AI and may have some of those functionalities just to get access. But it's going to be a combination, because I have to admit that we're going into an unprecedented time. And so how do you navigate the waters of artificial intelligence, but also maintain the strengths of community and in-person contact? And teaching young people, again, as I said, about their values, how to live those values, finding a like community that shares those values is
Mhm.
going to be important. And I'm looking at education spaces and wondering, yeah, are they paying attention to it enough? And most of them aren't.
Yeah. Wow. So, what's the iOS app? I mean, and that's available right now. People
Yes,
can
it's
download it.
available right now. It's called Inner Forge, and it's free.
Inner, or spell it out for me,
In
because
INNER,
okay, okay,
and then Forge, FORGE.
got it. And then the web app, is that live, or that's coming?
That's live. It's Forge AI, one word, .coach.
And I want to share. You are so spot on about the personal interaction, particularly for men, because we were all brought up with. There's some really bad advice we were all given, and we passed it on to our own kids and generations. Is if you want it done right, do it yourself. Terrible advice, absolutely terrible. I mean,
Right.
you talk about putting pressure and
Right.
stress on somebody, and then you wonder why they melt down. Well, because they didn't develop a community, because you told us if you want it done right, you got to do it by yourself. That was one terrible piece of advice. And then the second one
Mhm.
was it was suck it up, Buttercup. And
Yeah.
it's and then we wonder why our adult males and our later teen and young adults are have relationship issues and are not able to share their feelings or even identify their feelings, because they were always told to just suck it up. Um,
Right.
so that's part of that social emotional learning gap that we have. Um,
Mhm.
and I think you're spot on about the personal interaction. It's not, you can't, you you what did he say? Oh, I got this problem, and they go, oh, there's an app for that, and then we're just
Right.
reinforcing this idea of, well, you don't have to talk to anybody or interact with anybody, just there's an app for it. So within the men's Catholic arena, there is this almost a revival, if you want to call it that. It's called Inferno, and
Hmm.
that's the bigger. It started here in Colorado. That's the bigger picture, structure, if you will. But the one-on-one or group interaction is called CORE,
Mhm.
COR, and uh, and so I belong to two different core groups. The first Tuesday of the month
Wow.
and the third Thursday of the month, and it's 8 or 10
Oh,
guys. We get together. We have somebody make some appetizers. We have some beer, bourbon, whatever. We visit, and
mhm.
then we sit down and then we do a check in. What's going good in your life? What's not going so good, and what's said here stays here. What can we pray for you about? And we are not here to solve your problems, but we're here to
Right.
support you.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and the youngest guy in our group is 20, and the oldest guy in our group is 84. So
Wow.
it's and there's 85 of us all together, but we don't all 85 meet at the same time, and that's just in our uh, our parish of
Where
2,600
can I find
families.
more information on that? Because that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping to start, once I land
Yeah,
back north.
yeah, Inferno. Uh,
Okay.
I don't know if it's .org or .com. I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
get with you.
I'll find it.
I'll get with you offline. And then there's a guy. Did you ever meet Father Broyle Boyle in Los Angeles? Started
I
home,
know who he is, but I never met. No. Yeah.
man. You got. I met him probably 25 years ago. He was only
Oh,
5 years
wow.
into Homeboy Industries,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
in South Central LA, and getting gangbangers to walk away from that life and quit using excuses. Well, I can't get a job because I can't do this. And his vision was, well, fine, we're going to create our own industry. And he did. And then it grew into there's one homegirl. Uh, I don't think it's called Homegirl Industries, but that whole community, which goes back to that's rooted in that conversational phrase of it takes a village to raise a child. And now we're finally, I think, starting to realize, oh my God, that is true. And this AI digital is torn our villages apart. We're now trying to get back to that concept. It's a community effort, and it works.
Well,
Man, I'll
and
tell you.
F3 Nation. I'm sorry, Pat. F3
No,
Nation was the fitness group I was trying to
okay.
recall.
All right.
So
I'm gonna look
brings
that
people
one up.
together. Yeah.
That, and speaking of getting people together, how can people contact you to learn more, to support your vision, mission, or they got questions, or want to replicate what has worked for you? They want to replicate that where they're at.
Well, the best way, and I probably have to spell this out, is carencialeadership.com is my website. And Carencia is QUERENCIA leadership.com. And the term Carencia it's out there, but it was popularized by Ernest Hemingway in his story Death in the Afternoon, and he talked about a place in the bull ring where the bull knows it's being faced with danger and death, but there's always a place in that stadium where the bull can go to recenter itself, to regain energy, and it knows it's going to be okay once it gets to that place. So I'm helping young men in particular to start find their own Carencia. So it's carencialeadership.com.
Awesome. And I'll put that in the notes. And encourage people. And you and I, we've talked offline, so we've learned a little bit about each other. Um, for our listeners, reach out to Hans and learn more about what he's doing, how you can support that, or if you need that type of work and support in your life, that he can help you get it. Um, any last words, Hans, before we
I'm
wrap it up?
also, I mean, my name is unique enough so that I'm easily found, and so I hope your listeners will and watchers will reach out. This has been great. I enjoyed the conversation. It felt natural. It felt easy, and I think we we share a number of things in common. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, for our listeners, I want to thank you for joining us again today. It's only because of your support and downloading. We broke 4,500 downloads just earlier this week, 32 countries on 6 continents. and it is 100% all about you and your support. So we thank you. And always, always remember to strive to do the right thing, the right time, at the right way, for the right reasons, because that's what every warrior servant leader does every day, every time. Love you all and see you next week.